The sun had no mercy. It spilled over the desert like hot oil, pooling in gullies and clinging to stone. The girl lay beneath it, skin cracked and lips bloodless, the ground beneath her cheek so dry it turned to powder when she moved. She hadn't moved in hours, maybe days. Time had stopped counting. Her arms were raw where the ropes had bit, and though the knots were gone, the memory of them held tight. Her eyes opened just a sliver. Buzzards floated in the blue above her, indifferent and patient. The wind kicked up now and then, dragging a low whine across the sand. It lifted her hair, crusted with dirt, and tossed it across her face. Somewhere in her bones she knew she had once been strong. She had run with her brother through these same arroyos, her bare feet fast and sure. They had called her Little Fire then. Now there was no fire left, only the sun and the wind and the buzzards circling lower. She didn't cry. She had done all her crying the first day when they'd thrown her down, shouted at her in words she half understood, spit at her. One had yanked the beaded necklace from her throat. She'd thought they would kill her then, but they hadn't. Just turned their horses and left her with no water and no name. She hadn't cried since. A sound broke the stillness, a distant clatter, soft at first. Hooves, maybe. Then a second sound, sharper, the jingle of tack. Her heart didn't leap. It was too tired for that. But her eyes opened a little more, and her hand twitched once in the dust. He came from the east, a shape against the shimmering heat. Horse first, then man. Tall in the saddle, one hand resting easy on the horn. His shirt was the color of dried blood. His hat was pulled low, and his face was shadowed. But she could tell he'd seen her. He slowed his horse, reined in just a few paces from where she lay. For a moment, nothing moved. The wind died down. Even the buzzards held back. Then he stepped down, slow and deliberate. His boots sank into the sand. He crouched, one knee to the ground, and looked at her like a man trying to decide if a thing was alive or already lost. "God damn," he said, almost a whisper. His voice was rough, but not cruel. He reached out and touched her wrist, felt for a pulse. She didn't flinch. The canteen came next. Cool water slid against her cracked lips. She didn't swallow it first. Just let it sit there, foreign and clean. Then her throat worked, once, twice. He gave her more. A small splash ran down her chin and into the dust. "Gonna need to get you out of here," he muttered. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask what had happened or who'd left her. Just moved with a quiet, practiced care like he'd done this before. His hands were gentle but sure. He wrapped her in a saddle blanket and lifted her easy, like she weighed nothing. She didn't make a sound. The ride back was long. She drifted in and out. Sometimes the jolt of the horse woke her, sometimes the sound of his voice, soft things, half-sung, in a language she didn't know. Once, she thought she saw water ahead, a river maybe, but it vanished when she blinked. By the time they reached the ranch, dusk had settled over the land. The buildings rose out of the desert like tired bones, weathered wood, sagging porch, smoke trailing from a chimney. He took her inside, past a muttering dog and the creak of floorboards, laid her on a cot by the stove. The heat pressed against her skin, thick and real. She heard him boil water, cut cloth, heard the scrape of a chair as he sat near. The world blurred at the edges, soft and dark, but the last thing she remembered was his voice, quiet, steady as he said, "You're safe now. Ain't no one gonna leave you out there again." The fever took hold that night. It rolled through her in waves, dragging sweat from her skin and sounds from her throat she didn't recognize. Her body trembled and twisted beneath the blanket, her fists clutching at the edges of old dreams and sharp memories. In her mind, the desert came alive again, those men on horseback, shouting, one of them grabbing her wrist too tight. Her mother's face, vanishing behind a wall of smoke. Her brother's voice, calling her name until it disappeared into wind. He stayed by her side. The rancher. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew his presence solid and still, like a post driven deep into dry earth. When she cried out, he wiped her face with a damp cloth. When her breathing grew ragged, he murmured words she couldn't understand, but they softened the air around her. He didn't flinch when she clawed at him in the night, or when she spit water back at him. He just waited, let the storm pass. By morning, the fever broke. Her skin cooled. Her eyes opened, slow and uncertain. She saw the rafters above, then the edge of a shelf with jars lined up like sentinels, a broom leaning in the corner, the man's boots beside the bed. She turned her head. He was there, slumped in a wooden chair, one arm crossed over his chest, the other holding a tin cup. His eyes were closed, jaw unshaven. A streak of dried mud ran along his sleeve. She coughed. He opened his eyes at once. "You're back," he said. His voice was softer now. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. He handed her water again, and this time she drank it steady, slow. "You remember anything?" he asked. She looked at him, nodded once. He didn't push, just leaned back, rubbed a hand over his mouth, and let silence fill the room. For a few days, she didn't leave the bed. Her body was healing, but the rest of her lagged behind. She watched the light crawl across the walls each day, the way it shifted with the hours, the way the wind rattled the door. She learned the sounds of this place, the kettle's whistle, the soft grunt of a pig outside, boots on wood. He cooked most nights. Beans, cornbread, sometimes rabbit. He didn't talk much, but when he did, it was plain and without decoration. He called himself Eli, told her this was his land, his home since his father passed. "You got a name?" he asked one evening. She hesitated. Her voice was still hoarse. "Asha." He nodded like he already knew. The next morning, she stepped outside. The sun hit her like a slap, but she didn't flinch. The land stretched out before her wide and cracked, dotted with stubborn bushes and stone. She stood barefoot on the porch and took it in. The desert didn't care if she lived or died, but she wasn't afraid of it anymore. It had already tried. Eli was in the corral, working a stubborn roan gelding, his voice low and firm. She watched him a long while before she moved toward the fence. He noticed her but didn't stop what he was doing. When the horse finally stilled, he looked at her. "You ride?" She nodded once. He motioned with his chin. "Come tomorrow, before the heat sets in." And so it began. They worked side by side, not talking much, but something passed between them in the rhythm of tasks. She helped with the animals, gathered eggs, learned to mend fences. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached, but each day she stood taller. He showed her how to clean a rifle, how to find water where none seemed to be. He told her about his mother's people, how they were driven off land they'd never sold, how he'd been raised to keep what was his, but never forget what had been taken. "You ever lose something and know you'll never get it back?" he asked once. Asha met his eyes. Yes. They didn't speak more than that, but the silence was heavier now, full of shared weight. That night, when he handed her a plate, their fingers brushed. He didn't pull away, neither did she. Spring arrived like a quiet breath, barely softening the bones of the land. The desert remained dry, but here and there green pushed up through the cracks, stubborn, fleeting things. Asha rose before the light some mornings, her silhouette slipping across the yard like smoke, fetching water, brushing down the horses, checking the traps. Eli often found her already working, dust on her face, sleeves rolled. She had begun to hum sometimes, low and tuneless, the way her mother used to when the fire crackled low. They ate together most nights, the silence no longer stiff but easy. She'd begun speaking more words that came slowly at first, then more freely. English tangled with Apache. She would tell stories, sometimes, of her grandfather's hunts or the mountain spirits. Eli listened with the same patience he used to break wild colts, quiet, steady, never interrupting. He told her things too when the timing felt right, how he used to want to leave this place, how, after his father died, the house sat empty for nearly 2 years before he returned to it. Said the land called him back, though he didn't know why. He didn't speak of women, but Asha could tell there had been none in years. One evening, thunder rumbled far off, echoing across the mesas. She stood at the edge of the porch, watching the sky bruise with clouds. Eli stepped up beside her, arms crossed. "I was 14 when my brother was taken," she said, her voice even. "By soldiers. He was never found." He didn't answer, just let the silence hold space for what couldn't be fixed. "I used to think if I stayed quiet enough they'd forget about me," she went on. "But they didn't. They remembered. They always remember the girl." The wind picked up, scattering dust and the faint smell of sagebrush. Eli looked over. "You ain't invisible here." She met his gaze, and something passed between them then, not heat, not hunger, but recognition. Like they were the last two standing in a world that had emptied out long ago. After the rains passed, trouble came. It arrived as a man on a bay horse, slick coat, city boots. His name was Burke, and he rode with the kind of confidence that grew from other people's suffering. Said he was looking for Apache strays, runaways, thieves, girls who'd escaped the missions. Claimed he had government papers, but he never showed them. Asha was in the barn when he rode in. She saw the way he looked at Eli, not like an equal, but a nuisance. "You keep anyone else on this land?" Burke asked, scanning the property. Eli didn't answer, just folded his arms. Burke's eyes narrowed. "You'd do well not to get mixed up in certain things, rancher. The Bureau don't take kindly to harboring." "She's not property," Eli said. Burke smiled, teeth yellow. "Ain't about property. It's about peacekeeping." After he left, Asha didn't speak. She didn't run either. That night, she sat by the stove, her shoulders rigid. "I won't hide," she said. "You won't have to." But Eli's jaw was tight, and his eyes stayed on the dark window long after she'd gone to sleep. The next days were filled with tension. Burke hadn't said he'd return, but his kind always did. Eli showed her how to load the rifle, not just clean it. He stacked firewood higher, checked the locks on every door. Asha kept working, but her silence came back, and the hum was gone. One morning, while tending the chickens, Eli turned to her. "You think about leaving?" She looked up. "You want me to?" He shook his head. "Just want you to be free to choose." She nodded. "Then I choose to stay." It wasn't a declaration of love. Not yet. But it was the closest thing to a vow they'd shared. A promise made not with flowers or rings, but with dirt on their hands and the same dust in their lungs. That night, she found him on the porch, staring at the stars. "There's no safety out there for me," she said, "but there's something here that feels like breath." He looked at her, his face shadowed. "You give me reason to breathe, too." And for the first time, she stepped toward him not as someone saved, but as someone who had survived and chosen. Their hands found each other in the dark. The trouble didn't wait long. 3 days after Burke's visit, just before dawn, Eli heard the horses stir. A sharp clatter of hooves. Not fear, not panic, just enough to wake a man who'd lived too long in silence. He slipped from bed, rifle in hand, boots pulled on without socks. The sky outside was ink black. The edge of morning still a rumor. Asha was already at the door, barefoot, her braid hanging down her back. She didn't speak, just watched him, eyes wide and alert. He nodded once. They stepped out together, 2 riders this time. One was Burke, the other a lean man with a bad eye and a broken-toothed grin. They didn't speak right away, just sat atop their horses like they owned the land beneath them. "You're harboring a fugitive," Burke said finally. Ellie didn't answer. "She's wanted by the Bureau," the broken-toothed man added. "There's a price on her." Asha stepped forward. "I'm not anyone's bounty." Burke's face shifted, smug, turning cruel. "You don't get to decide that." Eli's voice came low and even. "You'll leave now." Burke laughed, short and hard. "You think you can stand against the law, rancher? You ain't got more than dust and pride." Eli raised the rifle, slow but steady. "I got enough." There was a standoff, the kind that stretches out over the land like heat, no sound but wind, and the soft creak of leather. Then, the broken-toothed man shifted in the saddle. Asha stepped beside Eli, silent. No gun in hand, just her stance firm, unshaken. "You fire on us," Burke warned. "You'll bring more." Eli didn't blink. "Then bring them. I'm done watching good people get taken like cattle." Burke's eyes narrowed. He spit in the dirt, turned his horse. "You'll regret this." They rode off without another word, but the threat hung in the air like smoke. The next weeks were spent preparing not for war, but for truth. Asha stayed close, but not out of fear. She helped reinforce the fence, bury supplies, load cartridges. They didn't talk about what was coming. They just worked. One night, as they sat by the fire, Eli held out a small leather pouch. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single silver coin, worn smooth. "My mother gave it to me before she died," he said. "Told me to keep it safe, for when I found something worth protecting." Asha didn't speak. She closed the pouch, held it in her palm. Then she reached into her blouse and pulled out what remained of her necklace, a single blue bead. She laid it in his hand. "You keep this," she said. Something in him cracked, then not broken, but opened. He reached out, touched her cheek, rough hand warm against her skin. "I never asked for you to come here," he said, voice low. "I never asked to be left," she answered. They kissed, not with hunger but with gravity, the kind that pulls things into orbit and refuses to let go. They made love that night, not in firelight romance, but in quiet need. The storm outside cracked and rolled, but the walls held. Morning came gold and clear. Burke never returned. Maybe the wind told him not to. Maybe he knew better than to test people who had already lost too much. In the weeks that followed, the land softened. Asha planted seeds along the side of the barn: corn, beans, squash. Things that could last. Eli built a second corral, stronger. They talked about putting up another cabin, maybe two. There was space enough. One evening, Asha stood at the edge of the porch, her hand resting on her stomach. She hadn't told him yet, not with words. But when Eli stepped beside her and wrapped his arm around her, she leaned into him. "I've been thinking," he said, "about building a schoolhouse. Maybe a place where folks like you and me can write our own names." She smiled. "And teach our children how to keep what's theirs." He kissed the side of her head, and for a long time they stood together, watching the last light slip behind the ridgeline. The wind carried the smell of rain. The summer came hard, all heat and stillness, the kind that made sweat bead before dawn and left skin darkened like cured hide. The land groaned beneath the sun, but the seeds Asha planted pushed through anyway. Stubborn things, like her. Each sprout that clawed its way into light felt like a victory. Life insisted on itself, even here. She moved with more care now. Her stomach had begun to round, not much, but enough that her balance shifted. Eli noticed before she said anything. He didn't ask. Just started cutting her firewood smaller, lifting heavier buckets himself. She let him, most days. One morning she sat on the porch, shelling beans into a tin bowl, the click of each pod cracking steady like breath. Eli came back from the north pasture, sweat streaking his shirt, and without a word, sat beside her. For a while they just worked side by side. Then he said, "Thought we could ride into town next week. Pick up things for the baby." She didn't look up. "They'll stare. Let them. Some will talk," he nodded. "Then we'll give them something worth talking about." She glanced over. "You sure about this?" Ailey met her eyes. "I've never been more." That evening they went through his father's old trunk. Inside was a ring plain, gold, worn smooth. Eli held it in his hand a long while, then slid it onto her finger. "No preacher," he said, "no church. But I've built a home with you. I've fought for you. That's vow enough." She rested her forehead against his, the gesture quiet and holy. "And I choose to stay, not because I have to, because I want to." They made the trip to town the next Thursday, riding in early before the sun got too bold. Heads turned. They expected it. A few men squinted and spit. One woman pulled her child closer. But no one said a thing. Eli kept his hand on her back, steady and clear, and Asha walked with her chin lifted. They bought cloth, flour, lamp oil, a new shovel, and baby things, small socks, a hand-stitched blanket, a wooden rattle carved by a blind old man near the livery. He didn't ask questions, just handed it to Asha with a crooked grin. "Looks like he'll have your fight," the man said. "Or her fire," Eli replied. Back at the ranch, the days settled into rhythm again. Asha read aloud from a tattered book Eli's mother had left behind. He fixed the roof on the chicken coop and started building the frame of a second cabin, one for later, when the child grew, when the land needed more room. One night, a breeze blew in from the west, cool and clean. Asha stood barefoot in the yard, her dress lifting in the wind, hands resting on the new swell of life within her. Eli came up behind her, wrapped his arms around her, chin on her shoulder. "Think he'll be like us?" he asked. "No," she whispered. "He'll be better, stronger, because we gave him something we never had." "What's that?" "Hope." The moon rose full and bright, painting the land in silver. Somewhere nearby, a coyote called, But it didn't sound lonely. It sounded alive. Asha turned to him, took his hand. This is our land now. Not because we bought it, but because we stayed when it tried to kill us. Because we made something grow. He kissed her slow and sure, not out of longing, but gratitude. Later, when they lay in bed, wind rustling the window panes, she rested her hand over his. What if someone comes again? She asked. Then we'll face them, together. She nodded, eyes closing. Good. I'm not afraid anymore. The next morning, a hummingbird hovered outside the window, wings a blur, pausing just long enough to be seen. Asha watched it for a moment, smiling. I think we'll be all right, she said. And they were.